Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy to be with you on this Tuesday. We're already into June. 2020 has been, for lack of a better word, a crazy year. And my weekend was spent watching news coverage of everything that was going on in the U.S. and the world. And it was actually a very nice, refreshing change that I got to sit down with two different authors over the weekend to talk about their books. Not to ignore what is happening in the world, but, you know, just to take a moment and think about a few different things and maybe put some things into different perspectives. So I'm appreciative that I had these two interviews and those moments throughout the weekend. Not going to talk too much about that. I'm sure you've, been keeping track, and maybe you are a little overwhelmed by it all. I know a lot of people I talk to are extremely overwhelmed. So let's talk about books for a while, and then we'll go back to the news and the world and everything that's going on there. But books are a wonderful way of learning and gaining knowledge and experiencing new things, but also, a little bit of escapism when you need it. So today I am speaking with author Christine Meade about her debut novel, The Way You Burn. When David approaches his New Hampshire cabin one cool October night to find it engulfed in flames, he knows his girlfriend Hope set the fire. At least, he's pretty sure he knows. David first decides to upend the creature comforts of his post-collegiate life and try roughing it for a year after he inherits 2 acres of land and a rustic cabin from his deceased grandfather. Life at the cabin proves to be more difficult than expected, however, and it all starts with the woman he loves, Hope, whose dark past is written in the twisting pink scars covering her body. Their relationship is challenged after his car slides through an intersection one night, and again later when he discovers that someone is out there in the woods watching him through the trees. Over the course of 5 seasons, David struggles to maintain his relationship with Hope. Ultimately, in an attempt to understand the sacrifices she's had to make, he decides to write their story. In doing so, he explores the lessons he's been left with now that everything he thought mattered has been gutted or burned away, and the surprising bits of wisdom he finds in the ashes. That is, again, the description of The Way You Burn, the debut novel of author Christine Meade. This book starts off, we talk a little bit about this in the interview. It starts off, and I, as a reader, was not fully sure which direction it might go. It's listed as a novel, but I felt like, is it going to be suspense? Are there going to be elements of thriller? Are there supernatural elements happening here? Where exactly are we going to go? And I was intrigued. It was definitely a way to keep me intrigued and guessing and keeping, turning those pages. I got to find out, okay, where is she going with this story? There's so many different layers and different people, and because it's told from David's perspective, we get the relationship from David's perspective. We don't necessarily get much of Hope's perspective. We get it through David's eyes. So you have to figure out, okay, this is from David's perspective. So what's really going on with Hope? What would she say if this story was written from her perspective? So there's lots of different little angles, and it's not just the relationship with David and Hope, but it's things that are happening at the cabin. It's a relationship he has with a man that he meets, an elderly gentleman that he meets and strikes up a friendship with. Just all kinds of different elements happening in this book that keep you engaged and guessing to some extent, but wanting to find out where this book is going to go. Now, I always like to point out, coincidences about the books and the authors that I have on the podcast. So my last interview was with author David Parrish. This book's main character is named David, and the author that I speak with, the second author I spoke with this weekend and whose interview will be up on Friday, is named David. And then if you tune in on Friday's episode, David and I talk about some of the coincidences between this book and his life and David, the character's life in The Way You Burn. I don't know. It was a very strange confluence of book events over the past couple of weeks, which is kind of cool. Let's go ahead and turn to the interview with Christine, and I'll stop talking about all the coincidences that I notice being a book podcaster. Again, the book is called The Way You Burn. The author is Christine Meade. Let's turn to that interview. Hi, Christine. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I am excited to talk about your debut novel, The Way You Burn. Before we get to that book, though, if you could share a little bit about yourself, that would be great.
Sure, absolutely. So I am a Boston-based writer. This is, as mentioned, my first novel to come out. And in addition to writing, I also teach creative writing at a couple local schools in the Boston area, and I do freelance book editing as well. And I just had a baby a couple of weeks ago too.
Oh yeah, and then there was that.
Yeah, casually that as well.
Right. I had some time, so I thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah. April was a big month.
Yes. So that is wonderful. Thank you, and congratulations on the new baby.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk about the book. As I mentioned, it is called The Way You Burn. Can you give a bit of an overview of the story?
Yeah, sure. So The Way You Burn is a coming-of-age novel, but a coming-of-age novel for a character named David who's in his mid-20s. So the book begins with him meeting this woman named Hope. And shortly after they meet and start to have a relationship, he inherits a cabin in the woods of New Hampshire from his late grandfather. So he decides to kind of make a personal challenge to try living up at the cabin for a year. And over the course of that year, he's faced a lot of challenges through his relationship with Hope. And in doing so, he really uncovers his family's hidden and secret past, while he's staying in New Hampshire.
Yeah, and I don't want to give a lot away, because things really develop throughout the book, and so I don't want to give a lot of that away. But there's a lot that happens in this book. There's a lot of emotional arcs. There's a lot of family arcs. What was your initial inspiration to write the book?
Right. So my parents do have a cabin in New Hampshire that they got when I was probably a little kid. So I spent a lot of time in New Hampshire, and I went on a historical tour of an old building in the town where we have our cabin, and just the stories from the town, from the past couple, decades and centuries, and the stories of the families who lived there, I found so fascinating. So that was actually what started getting me interested in researching the small rural town in New Hampshire. And then kind of the story sort of evolved from there, I would say.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about David as the main character. It's told from his perspective, and he's talking to Hope throughout the book. So just to give people an idea of the voice, what about David do you think might resonate with readers?
I think David's definitely at a point in his life where he's figuring himself out, and I guess we all go through different phases of that in our own lives. But I've always been really interested in writing characters that are in that kind of post-collegiate age. They're done with the confines of kind of living with their parents, maybe not. That's extending now, I would certainly say. They're done with college. They're really starting their real adult lives. And so I was interested in writing from a point of view that is taking place, and that it feels like an edge of a cliff, right? Like you don't know how your life will unfold at point in, early to mid 20s. So David's sort of starting out on this sort of adult journey himself, and he's trying to figure out his boundaries in terms of relationships to others, and who he is as an individual, like what kind of person he is. And I think what he previously knew to be true about himself is challenged throughout the book. And I think that's something that we all experience. So I think regardless of gender, that's a relatable aspect of David.
And so why did you choose to write the story then from David's perspective as opposed to Hope's perspective?
Yeah. Honestly, I wanted David to basically understand the context of the women in his life and the challenges that they face. So instead of telling the story from a female perspective, I wanted the story to be from David's perspective, so we see his kind of coming to understand and realize what the women in his life have had to face throughout the generations. So it's a lot about his learning and his coming of age, and I wanted that not from a firsthand, say, victim perspective, but from the male understanding what the female went through.
Now that you have a bit better understanding of David, the main character, and why the book is written from his perspective and point of view, we're going to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more about Hope and, the character of Hope and how she plays into the story, even though we're not seeing things from her perspective. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. We were speaking before the break about the main character of the novel, The Way You Burn, David. The story is told from his perspective. So let's go ahead and go back to the interview and talk a little bit more about the character of Hope.
Hope herself, yes, is a very complicated character.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting to see her from David's perspective because they do have a relationship and he is in love with her, but I don't know that he always completely understands her, which is understandable because they're both young.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about Hope's character and her place in the story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the way I kind of imagined it is, you hear a lot about in literature and movies, like the idea of the manic pixie dream girl. And I sort of envisioned David as seeing Hope as this kind of like quirky, offbeat, like really interesting individual when he first meets her. And especially because she's very different than him. Like he's very kind of color inside the lines kind of guy. He, went to college, got the job, saved his money. Like he's sort of followed the script thus far, I think, in his life and played it safe. And she is much more of a risk taker. When he first meets her, he notices that she has scars on her face, that she's kind of just, unabashedly, not to hide when he first encounters her. And so there's always this mystery surrounding her. And I think that mystery and that, intrigue in terms of her personality being so kind of polar opposite to his is what initially draws David to Hope. But, you know, over the course of their relationship, he really realizes that she's had trauma that she's had to deal with in her past, and she's far more complicated than what he initially saw. So I always think that's interesting. You know, when we first meet people, we may think they're one way, but like the more you get to know them, or as time goes on, their true character and their stories and their history unfolds, so you get a full picture. And I think that's what happens between David and Hope over the course of the book.
Did you ever consider writing it from Hope's perspective, or maybe writing it from both of their perspectives?
I honestly didn't. After the fact, you know, people have mentioned after they read the book, like, oh, I'd love to know, you know, from Hope's perspective. And it's definitely, you know, it would be interesting. I think it would be a very, very different book. You know, I think Hope she's almost not at that. She's not all ready, I think, to learn these deeper lessons about herself. Like, she had to learn some hard things when she was younger, and I think she's, you know, she's at a different point in her life right now than David is. So I think it would be a very different type of book, without giving too much away.
Right. That's always the trick with books like this. Know, you don't want to give too much away. So we're like dancing around these different topics. It's a coming of age story, but it has some elements of, like, when you first start reading it, you're not sure, is this going to be suspense? Is there going to be some sort of, like, maybe supernatural element to it? Can you talk a little bit about those different, again, without giving too much away, but kind of those different the paths that the book could take?
Yeah, sure. I think one thing, whenever I'm writing anything, I'm always intrigued by the idea of a secret. You know, I think every character essentially has a secret, at least one good secret, you know, and so I'm always interested in spending some time figuring out, like, what each character's secret is that they're keeping, who are they keeping it from, and why. And I think having that in mind, you know, as I write a novel is important, because it does create that element of suspense. Like, there's always some sort of shadow in the room or in the scene that I want the reader to wonder about. And I think that's what, you know, incites the initial curiosity, hopefully from a reader, to wonder even about what is the exact genre of this book, because there is always that dark shadow, like, where is this going? And I like, when I'm reading books, to kind of be taken on a journey where I'm not exactly sure where I'm going just yet, you know, from the outset of the book. So I tried to do that in this book as well.
Well, it definitely makes you continue to turn the page, because I kept thinking, okay, no, what is that about? Is that where are we going with this? Did you do any particular research for the book?
Yeah, I definitely did research, as I mentioned, about the town in particular. So all of the kind of, like, details and history that goes into the town was all, like, accurate from research. And I also researched, there's elements of, as I mentioned, kind of women from past generations, and their treatment in terms of, you know, having relationships out of wedlock, and how those kind of unfolded for women in other generations. So I did a lot of, like, research on that level as well.
Oh, that sounds fascinating, but also probably really heartbreaking.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I found some really interesting books that had all these, like, first-hand accounts from women that, you know, are in my grandfather's generation, you know, and it was very, very interesting and heartbreaking.
Yeah, I bet, because it was such a different point of view, and
absolutely,
yeah. So you mentioned that you are from Boston, and that your parents had a cabin. Are there other autobiographical elements within the story?
I would say not so much in terms of the plot, but I think more so the setting. You know, people who know me, who read the book, are like, oh, I can picture exactly where this is. So they are familiar with the setting. Like, all of those details are very kind of accurate to real places. But the characters are more kind of just composites, or kind of creations from my imagination. You know, I've I dredged up all of the complicated twists, I think, of past relationships that I had in my 20s that kind of feed into there, but the characters themselves weren't really based off of anyone in particular.
Okay, thank you for that. So I know that you mentioned that you teach writing. You do, according to your website, you do a lot of other types of writing.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk a little bit about some of the other writing that you do?
Yeah, sure. So I do freelance. I've been a full-time reporter, so I do kind of freelance journalism, and I write essays, and I also, spend a good amount of time editing. So I love helping other writers kind of find the gems in their own work and their own books, and helping them kind of craft them to perfection. Getting the draft, like I'm sure if I looked at a first draft, if I could dredge it up of this book to where it is now, it would be like grossly different. So I think that's been really enjoyable for me, is to help other people take their initial drafts and kind of push them and twist them and change them and revise them to get them to like that sweet spot, I think, at the end.
And how different is it when you're trying to do that for your own book? Did you find that to be challenging or interesting, or just kind of normal?
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. I think, the more I do it with other people, and, and I also have a writing group that I've been a part of a writing group since I finished my MFA, so probably like 10 years ago. So I think that's really important for writers to have a sounding board. So whether it is they're working with editors or they have, a writing community of sorts, I find that that's so important. And that was really important for me for this book. So I had my, writing group read it as well, and I use their feedback to help point out, there's always things that you yourself can't notice as a writer, your blind spots. And I think having outside eyes on your work is critical to pushing it to as good as it can get.
Absolutely. How do you find that teaching writing affects your own writing, or vice versa, how writing affects your teaching maybe?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, honestly, I've always had just like an earnest passion for writing in general. Like I started trying to write when I was about 5 or 6 years old. So it's always been there, and I think I love, in terms of teaching, I love trying to inspire, especially like younger students, to get them into and excited about writing. So I think inspiring other people to write helps drive the idea home for myself that, yes, this is important, it's worth my time to continue. It's easy when you're alone and you're at your desk, hours every day, and no one's seeing your work ever, and you're kind of toiling away. It's easy to think, like, is this worth it? Or like, is this worth my time? But when I find that I'm teaching, it helps reinforce, like, yes, this is worth it. I'm telling other people it's worth it, so it's worth it for me as well.
Time for our second break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit about how Christine came to write this novel and her experience of writing throughout her life. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
the GSMC Book Review Podcast. This is a tangent, and I apologize, but I was thinking over the break that when I do podcasts, when I record podcasts, I talk with my hands. When I do public speaking, I talk with my hands, which maybe makes a little more sense than when I am sitting alone in the studio talking with my hands. But it made me think that when I do interviews, I always tend to be a little nervous when I am speaking with authors, even after having done in the hundreds of interviews, which is crazy. I talk with my hands expansively when I am asking questions. My hands are going everywhere. I mean, they're going over my head. They are gesturing madly, and it kind of makes me laugh. That just occurred to me because, of course, I was talking with my hands when I was speaking those few words to go to commercial. And I just thought I would share that completely random tangent with you so that you can see even more of my strange neuroses. I'm sure you're thrilled that I shared that with you. Okay, I'm going to go back to talking with my hands. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to go back to letting Christine talk about her book. And maybe she's talking with her hands. I will never know. Because we don't do video episodes yet. We just do, or video interviews. We just do audio at the moment. So back to the interview with Christine.
And in terms of, trying to start writing at 5 or 6, so you basically knew that that's what you wanted to do throughout your life, or kind of how did you come to decide to write a novel?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I was like a voracious reader all the time, so I've always been particularly interested in novels. Like I love to read novels, and I always have. And I think even going back to when I was young, I think especially my dad, he's a big storyteller, so he'd always tell us these adventure stories going to bed each night. And so I think that early instinct to tell stories was developed in me from a really young age. So I loved the idea of story, and I loved the idea of mystery and adventure from a young age. So I think that kind of helped kick off my interest in writing. And then I honestly tried to write my first novel, I think when I was in 5th grade. I still have it. It's a horror novel. So I've been trying, for a very long time at this point since I was little to write. But at least this one's I finally got The Way You Burn out. So hopefully I'll have more coming along the way.
Do you still have a copy of your 5th grade horror novel?
Yes, it's about this villain who haunts people in their dreams. So he'll visit them in their dreams and haunt them. I was really into R.L. Stein and that kind of thing in elementary school.
Oh my goodness, that's so far away from where I was in the 5th grade. I was not reading horror.
I wouldn't be able to read it now. It'd keep me up all night, but I could then.
That's funny. And are you working on anything new now? I mean, you just had a baby, and this book just came out,
yeah.
But what's going on in your brain in terms of new stuff?
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it going. I have another book. It's a YA novel that I'm just finishing up. Final editing touches on, but it's about this, again, we're going small town New England, but it's about this girl who's in search of her mom who's been missing, and she heads to this small town in Maine where her mom visits each summer. So she's trying to find her mom, and again, there's a lot of secrets. Everyone's got a secret in there as well, and she's trying to basically gather whatever information she can from all these people who have known her mom in different ways and kind of parse together a clearer image of who her mother was and where she may be.
Thank you. That sounds really interesting.
In terms of your own process in writing, would you have advice for aspiring authors?
I think the best advice that's worked for me essentially is creating a routine around writing. So I've for a long time, I would say probably 12 years, for the past 12 years, I try to write just 1 hour a day, Monday through Friday. And it's not a ton, but I know I can at least do that. And if I do a lot more than that, awesome. But I try to make sure I commit to that, and I'll write it in my planner. I'll schedule it out and make it a non-negotiable. And even since I had a baby, I took obviously like a couple weeks off, but then I tried to get right back to it just to get a little bit of time during those naps, to keep it going each day. And even if it's hard and you're not sure what to write, I think like continuing to return to your story, especially if you're working on a novel, but that repetition and that continued, visiting that world that you're creating, it just keeps you in mind of what's happening in the book. So then when you're not working on the book, your subconscious is doing the work. So you'll find solutions when you're, going for a walk or doing housework or whatever, as long as you're still in the story, you have your feet in the story.
And when you take time or find time to read for yourself, do you have favorite authors or genres that you prefer?
I love fiction and memoir. Right now, I just got Lily King's Writers and Lovers. I haven't started it yet. And I'm reading Stephanie Danler, the author of Sweet Bitter. She has a memoir, Stray, that just came out. So I'm reading that and really enjoying it as well. One of my favorite authors is the author Samantha Hunt. I took a workshop with her in New York in the fall. That was a lot of fun. But I love her novels. They're great.
And are you reading with the baby?
Yes, I'm reading whenever I can. I'm reading with the baby. Yeah, when he falls asleep, I've got my books out. So.
But are you reading to the baby yet?
Oh, to the baby. I haven't yet. I'm not sure he'd like the books that I've got picked out for him so far. So they're a little advanced. He's awake long enough to listen to me, I'll start doing that.
That's funny. I just I like to be nosy about books.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've got his whole bookshelf all set up, so can't wait to dig into it a little bit.
Yeah, it's nice to already have a library.
I know.
So before you even know what a library is.
Yeah, it's important, and that's what I asked at the baby shower. Like, instead of a card, bring a book. I'm like, I'd rather have a collection of little books for him than cards.
I've been to similar baby showers. I like them.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I know.
So I know that you have a website. So if you can tell people your website as well as where they might be able to interact with you on social media.
Yeah, sure. So my website is Christine with ch-meade, MEADE.com. And I have info about my book up there. I have a blog and my information about the editing that I do for people. And then on social media, on Instagram and Twitter, it's just at Christine Meade, ChristineMeade. And it's at Christine Meade kind of across the board. So pretty easy to find.
Perfect. Thank you. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like for people to know about your writing, or really just anything that we haven't covered that you were hoping to talk about in this interview?
Not particular. I think we kind of covered all the basics. So I think that's it.
All right. Wonderful. Well, I do want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it. And again, the book is called The Way You Burn. When did it come out?
It came out April 14th, so just last month.
Oh, geez. April was a huge month for you.
Oh yeah, it was a very big month.
Well, congratulations on both baby and book.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
And thank you again, Christine, for joining me.
All right, thanks. Have a good one.
So thank you once again to Christine for joining me. And can I just say, wow, she had a book come out in April of 2020. She had a baby in April. I was trying to think of what I did in April besides barely celebrating my birthday. I'm not even sure if I did anything. You know, with sheltering in place, I was pretty much just a homebody, and I don't even know if I put on pants other than yoga pants for the entire month of April. Oh, wow. Yes, Christine might be my new hero. I will look to her for inspiration. And then now she has just given an interview with a baby who is less than 2 months old. And, yeah, I'm very impressed. So thanks, Christine, and good for you. You could be exhausted, but you still were engaging, and I very much enjoyed chatting with you about your book. So thank you, as always, to you, my listeners, for joining me for the podcast. As always, if you enjoy the show, please do remember to give us a nice review, whether that's written or 5-star. That really helps us out. It helps us to get this podcast to other bookworms like you. Or the meme that I like on social media that says, I'm not a bookworm, I'm a book dragon. Hey, whether you're a bookworm or a book dragon, help us out and help us to get this podcast out to other book lovers like yourselves. Also follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, GSMC Book Review. Would love to hear from you, hear what you're reading, hear how things are going, etc. Thank you again, and please join me on Friday when we will have our second David author in a week, and also our third David reference in a week, if you remember from earlier when I was talking about the coincidences. Please join me then for my interview with author David Puritz for his book, The Escapist. In the meantime, have a great week. Stay safe. Stay safe. That's the best thing I can say. And I hope that you find time in all of the craziness of the world right now to still get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.